Welcome to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast. Today I'm here with Stevn Jones, founder of the Disability Connect mentoring scheme. Disability Connect puts business leaders together with talented disabled mentors to help increase their knowledge of disability and implement effective change within their organizations. Welcome to the podcast, Stevn.
Thank you. Really good to be here.
Can you start off by telling us a bit about your background and how you came to found Disability Connect?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Joe. So my name's Stevn Jones. I'm 29 years old, soon to be 30 next month. And I was born with SMA, which is spinal muscular atrophy, which is a genetic muscle weakness condition. And that means I permanently use a wheelchair. So majority of the time using a manual wheelchair, but I also use an electric wheelchair as well. So I've got lots of sort of first-hand experience of disability, somewhat having a change in disability as sort of in my early 20s or in my teenage years, I was slowing down a bit, losing that ability to walk, sort of using my wheelchair a bit more. So I've got lots of experience in terms of what that means and what that means in terms of going into education and employment as well. So I went to sort of university after school, and I suppose I really enjoyed university. I felt it quite sheltered in terms of you get lots of support. My university sort of disability services were really good in terms of reasonable adjustments when it came to physically getting around the campus, plus also exams and sort of studying and all of that really. And then I suppose I went into sort of looking for graduate jobs, and I did a placement year as well. And I think I sort of found it quite challenging in terms of finding the employer that was right for me, plus also finding the employer who could sort of accommodate reasonable adjustments in quite a confident way. And I think there was lots of sort of challenges which came about that. So, for example, some organisations, potentially smaller organisations, were based upstairs, and they were said, "Well, we're based upstairs, and that's it." So that was almost an immediate barrier in terms of that. And also little things like I remember having a job interview once, and it was in central London, and I'd sort of said, "Oh, I drive into London," sort of thing, because public transport isn't really the best for me. Do you have a car park? And they sort of said, "Yes, we do." And I sort of arrived, and you had to get out of the car, open the barrier, drive your car in, shut the barrier. And that was quite impossible when I'd sort of navigating the wheelchair and getting out of the car and all of that stuff. So because of those challenges, I sort of created the Disability Connect mentoring scheme. And the scheme sort of pairs organisations with a disabled mentor to sort of share what works for them, what doesn't work for them, to really help that organisation upskill themselves on disability and become disability confident as well.
Thanks for that. So you've talked there about the experiences you yourself had with employers and the way that those employers approach disability. Can you expand on that a little bit more and kind of talk about how society views disability and what are the...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and sort of picking up your point on society, I would say things have become a lot better. I think lots of organisations and sort of the public are starting to really see the value in diversity and inclusion and disability as well. I mean, I think with diversity, it really reduces that sort of groupthink. It brings in lots more ideas, opinions, life experiences as well, and it sort of makes business and sort of commercial sense. Interestingly, the charity Scope, which is a really, really good charity, does lots of great work, did a bit of a survey and sort of still found that 1 in 3 people, so general people in society, see disabled people as less productive than non-disabled people, and that's quite a shocking sort of number there, sort of 1 in 3 really. And I've sort of found it's almost the other way. Lots of my disabled friends or colleagues or disabled people in my network have to work a lot harder to sort of get jobs, keep jobs, and sort of face those barriers as well. And I think that links into your question on sort of the models of disability. So hopefully people might have heard of the social model of disability. So this model, it was created by disabled people, and it pretty much says that people are disabled not by their impairment, but by the world that they live in. So, for example, as a wheelchair user, trying to access a building with steps or with no lift, that's not that person's fault. It's not that wheelchair user's fault. It is the fault of society, the building, the people who built that building, the organisation that sort of operates in there, for example. And other examples may include, let's say, someone with a learning difficulty, they sort of live with friends and family, they want to live independently, but they don't have the facilities or know how to pay their rent, for example. And in theory, that's not their fault. It's the fault of organisations, of the landlord, for example, that aren't sort of equipped and aren't willing to sort of help them with that. So the social model really, really turns the onus away from disabled people and onto society as a whole and makes everyone accountable. Some other models sort of include the medical model. It's fairly old-fashioned, I would say, and that model was really around that disabled person wants to be fixed. They need medicine, they need help. And it sort of is the opposite to the social model, which is sort of more empowering. There's a couple of other models, but another one that comes to mind is sort of the religious model, which is almost this sort of feeling that that disabled person has done something wrong in a previous life, and this is why they have a disability in their sort of life as well. So there's lots of sort of previous models out there, but the social model is that really empowering one in the disabled community.
And do you feel like that social model is the best model to be followed in order to kind of improve the lives of disabled people?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Because I think making or putting that onus on everyone in society and saying, look, we're all jointly responsible for creating a equal world. I think that's the only way where we're actually sort of going to get movement behind this and keep going. And I think models like that can apply across the diversity characteristics as well.
Do you think there is still a stigma in society surrounding the employment of disabled people?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I found that some organisations are absolutely brilliant at it, and are really, really confident and all of that. And some organisations as well simply don't know what to do or how to handle situations, but the willing is there. But I still think in lots of companies and in society, there is that still bit of a stigma, and sometimes that can just be based on people's life experience and sort of unconscious bias as well. So, and I think it's I think it's a fair point if you've never, or if you've only had one view of, let's say, disabled person, lots of people sort of relate it to grandparents or potentially their parents as well. Quite often than not, some people can say, well, actually, every disabled person might be like that, which is not the case really. So I suppose it's that exposure really. And I think even me, before sort of creating Disability Connect, I was obviously very aware of physical disabilities and what these meant and what the challenges are, but sort of running Disability Connect and sort of exposing myself to lots of different people and lots of different networks has really opened my eyes to the real range of disabilities out there across sort of like mental health, neurodiverse, fluctuating conditions as well.
It's interesting. What are some of the common barriers that disabled people often face in the workplace?
Yeah, really good question, Joe. So I suppose I've covered some of my own at the start, and so I suppose one of the main ones are that sort of those physical barriers. So as I was saying about parking can be a challenge, and sort of steps, not having rails on stairs, for example, not having a lift, doors not being automatic. Travel is a big one as well. So still, I think the travel system in the UK isn't as good as it could be in some places. Plus, some people may not be comfortable going on public transport. Some people, because of their disability, might not be able to drive as well, really. So I think organisations placing themselves in a in a place which has public transport links, plus also has other modes of transport, I think really sort of opens the doors to lots of different people being able to work there. Another sort of common barrier in the workplace is sort of workplace policies. So, for example, sickness policy, potentially having a policy for someone with a fluctuating condition, for example, and to allow them to potentially have more time off when that sort of condition worsens and all of that. And also, as something that comes up quite a lot, especially in the recent years, as we've sort of been going back into the office following COVID, is that sort of flexible working and hybrid working option. Lots of companies have really sort of taken on board that and are sort of really running with it successfully. I think it's still a bit of a barrier sometimes. So actually, not everyone wants to work from home all of the time. Some people sort of enjoy coming into the office. They sort of get exercise. It gives them interaction with other people. Some people might need more guidance as well when they find it easier in the office, really. So, but then equally, travel and commuting can be really difficult for some people as well, really. So it's really looking at how that sort of hybrid and flexible working option sort of works for people individually. And I found as well, so conducted a couple of sort of reviews for organisations about their sort of disability arrangements, and sort of an outcome of that was sort of recommended where they could strengthen. And I think really interesting, lots of companies, they might not necessarily have in their policies how they operate on day to day. So on a day-to-day basis, they might be really accommodating, they might be very flexible. However, that might not translate through to their policies, and that might put a bit of a barrier when people are sort of onboarding into the organisation and thinking, actually, will I be able to do this role? And I suppose the last barrier I was just going to mention is probably the social aspect as well. And I wanted to mention this one because it's not really mentioned too much, but some organisations might have a sort of social norm that they go to the pub every Thursday night, and that's where sort of relationships are built. That's where potentially some business is done and next steps has been spoken about. However, if a disabled person is far too tired, needs to sort of go home for potential exercise physio, for example, that might sort of exclude them as well. And I remember when I was looking for a graduate job and I saw this really good job and I was thinking, actually, that might be something for me to look at. And in their job description, they put something like, we're a really social team. And I thought, oh, that's really, really good. And they said, oh, we go like go-karting and do sort of other physical stuff. And I suppose I felt quite excluded from that because I was thinking, well, I won't be able to go axe throwing and rock climbing and all of that, really. And I think that's a really, really positive thing that organisation does that, but it's almost thinking, actually, if a disabled person was going to come into your organisation, how would you sort of remove that barrier from that first step of sort of advertising that job? And that could be almost giving a bit more sort of diversity behind the activities that can be done, really. So a couple of barriers, sort of just pulling up there. There's a couple more, but I just wanted to focus on those ones.
That's really interesting there. And it kind of leads us on to our next question, which is, other than getting involved in the great work that you do at Disability Connect, which we'll talk about soon, what can businesses and organizations do to work to remove these barriers to work for disabled people?
Yeah, definitely. So organisations can do lots of practical things to really help disabled people. I'd say the first one is to get insight and get exposure. So ask your existing team what more could be done. Don't be afraid about sort of asking people externally as well. There's lots of services out there that can sort of do reviews, can look at website accessibility, can look at comms, can look at policies and operations really. So I would be saying, look, what advice and support can you get initially? And I think internally, your team probably have lots of great ideas. I think secondly, looking at potentially what the barriers might be and really having to think about what that is in your organization. One of the most common barriers I found is reasonable adjustments. So employees have to put these in place by law, but it's almost about actually what they are, how can they be sort of embedded in the organization, and is the organization sort of got clear processes and policies in place to do that. So I'd really say, how strong is the sort of reasonable adjustment process? And then I think as well, thirdly, the culture of the organisation. So people sort of think about actually what is that company's values? What are they trying to deliver, and how do they come across? And I think changing the culture is really, really difficult, and I think it's really hard. But I suppose quite often it starts at the top. So actually, does the top level board have a real interested, are really interested and sort of committed to diversity inclusion as well, and sort of moving away from that tick box exercise and how to sort of embed that throughout the organisation as well. And lots of companies have a sort of people plan with sort of diversity initiatives throughout. Others will have a sort of a disability action plan as well. So I think it's thinking about actually what are the challenges, where do companies want to get to, and really getting that insight and advice to help them sort of unpick that and really deliver that as well.
The sort of policies that you would recommend a business introduce, I'm guessing they'd be quite different for different businesses, different sizes of businesses. But are there any policies that you think kind of should be kind of as standard?
Yeah, really good question. I would say just building on that sort of flexible working and hybrid working, I think that's quite a big one as well. And I would say it's almost yes, there can be a company-wide policy, but actually what does that mean on an individual basis when it comes to disability? I think that links on to reasonable adjustments. Actually providing examples to employers about what these are, what the organisation can provide, what they want to provide as well, can be really, really valuable. And actually having quite a clear step-by-step guide about how people go about asking for them, having a clear named contact, how long it will take about arranging them as well. I think that's really positive. It shouldn't really be relied on by just the manager to implement these. I think it should almost be that sort of central guidance across the company, so that's really fair across the different teams in the organisation. I think there's other things as well that sort of can be done. So lots of organisations will simply have checklists when they're arranging events. And that might be in person, so making sure the venue itself is accessible, making sure there's alternative communication methods, for example, but equally on Teams or Zoom or anything else really, having accessible virtual meetings. So this might be using the captions, for example. Sometimes a big blocker on accessibility is the time that meetings take place. So actually having a meeting at 8 a.m. might not be sort of appropriate for someone who may take a bit longer or need support and care, sort of getting up and getting ready in the morning. So actually it's about potentially having a meeting etiquette. So what are the core times that sort of is suitable for everyone as well? And I sort of just building on what I said previously about sort of accessible communications. I think a really good thing on the Microsoft packages, there's an accessibility tracker as well, and that can simply be used by going to sort of review and then sort of check accessibility. and that helps to review documents to make sure they are accessible to people that might use screen readers or other software as well.
So there's really is many solutions that businesses can implement. Just a final one on this subject, Stephen, is what you've talked a little bit about recruitment so far. Can you expand on that a bit more? What can businesses do to recruit more and retain? Well, I suppose it's more about the recruitment side of things. What can they do to recruit disabled people?
Mm-hmm. No, really, really good question. And I think recruitment almost starts before there is even a job available. And I think it's building that company image about actually this is an organisation where disabled people want to work, where they will be valued. So I suppose it's almost that first step is thinking, how do you come across externally as an organisation? And that might be really positive already. Might be doing really good work in your sort of local community, or there might be other things you could do in terms of publishing externally or sort of commitment to disability as well. And I think that's a real pull for people to consider that organisation. And I would say when applying for a job or advertising a job, I think it's really key in terms of not making the job sound harder than it is. I think lots of people, when they write job descriptions, want to make it sound really challenging and really fun and all of that stuff. And I think it's really about having a true reflection of what the day-to-day responsibilities of that job will be. I think it's really key to sort of practically offer reasonable adjustments at the interview stage. So potentially someone might want to see the job description in a different format. They might need sort of larger text. They might need sort of a Braille, for example. So it's really about showing what you can offer on that job description. I think it's really effective when employers say, if you require any reasonable adjustments, such as X, Y, Z, and that really gives people a bit of a flavour about actually what they provide and really removes some of those barriers. I think in the interview process itself, it's more thinking about actually how are you sort of going to get the best from everyone. So actually having a full day assessment centre, if someone potentially has fatigue, might find that very difficult, for example. So it's almost about having those options for people to potentially have the assessment done differently in a real open and fair way. And just on your point on retention, I think retention's a really key point as well. So about 8 out of 10 disabled people actually acquire their disability during their working life. So a massive amount of people actually become disabled whilst they're at work. And that actually means that they might require different adjustments than they never needed before as well. And it's all about actually, if a safe and secure sort of cultural environment has been created, do they really feel like they can sort of reach out to potentially HR and their manager and say, look, I'm going through X, Y, and Z. I really want to maintain performance. I really want to stay here. What can be done? And especially for fluctuating conditions, potentially, if someone's got a sudden illness, for example, a reasonable adjustment could easily be reducing KPIs for a set period of time, for example. So those key performance indicators, and then sort of bringing them back up to level, potentially when that person sort of feels better or their fluctuating condition has sort of got a bit better as well in that sense.
Moving on now to the work that you do within Disability Connect. Can you talk a little bit more about the organization? What achievements have you had, and what do you actually do when you get a new client on board, and how can businesses get involved?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So Disability Connect is a inclusion specialist. So our main service is providing reverse mentors. So we have lots of organisations across the charity sector, in sort of government as well, local councils, as well as big PLC organisations who sort of sign up for the mentoring scheme. In the mentoring scheme, they get given a sort of reverse mentor. I've got a really, really good pool of reverse mentors. They're sort of brilliant people, really committed to diversity and inclusion and really raising awareness as well. And they will work with that organisation over a 6-month period where they will sort of share what works for them when it comes to disability, what doesn't. They will sort of walk through different things, so like website accessibility. So often they will speak to someone actually about your website isn't accessible for me because of X, Y, and Z. They also sort of look at customer journeys when it comes to applying for jobs and really helps that organisation to strengthen their policies and processes as well. And also it gives that organisation real insight into someone that has sort of that first-hand knowledge and experience of disability, which is really, really valuable. Other services we provide is we do lots of speaking events, so go into organisations and we have lots of events on some of the things we spoke about today, sort of going into more details about the social model of disability, what that means for organisations as well, reasonable adjustments, what they are, when organisations have to legally consider them as well. Plus also I do lots of sort of sharing my story events where me and others will sort of come in and say, I have this disability and this is what it means for me. And those are quite powerful stories in terms of what organisations can sort of learn and take from that. And then just lastly as well, we do offer sort of tailored services as well in terms of external accessibility reviews and also disability insight. So for example, we can sort of organise focus groups with disabled people if you want advice on a new policy or process, and also do sort of reviews on sort of websites, external comms and other things like that as well. So really broad in the services that we offer.
Loads of interesting work going on there. And thanks for being on the podcast today, Stephen, and telling us all about it. Finally, can you just let us know how businesses should get in touch if they want to speak to you further about this?
Yeah, of course. So you can email Disability Connect at info@disabilityconnect.org.uk. We've got a website as well. If you Google Disability Connect Mentoring Scheme, and that provides lots of information and insight and testimonies as well from previous customers. And we're also on LinkedIn and Twitter as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. And yeah, all the best with the next stages of the organization.
Thank you so much, Joe.